First story, The Ghost Train of Chebuncook Pond. I've always believed the Maine woods could heal a man. That's why Bill and I drove north to Chebuncook Pond. We'd been fishing together since high school, but this trip wasn't just about trout. It was about getting away from everything, the stress, the noise, the routines. We wanted real quiet. What we got was something else. The road to Chebuncook narrows into a cracked ribbon that runs through miles of pine, fir, and bog. No towns for 30 miles. Just trees, water, and the occasional wildlife crossing. Bill and I set up camp near the pond's north end, where a narrow trail snaked off through the trees behind our site. It wasn't on the map, but it caught my eye. There was something strange about how straight it was, unnaturally straight, not like an old logging road. It didn't curve with the land, it cut through it. Bill didn't care. "You want to fish or hike old logging roads?" he asked, already threading his rod. I let it go. We grilled up some lake bass, watched the fire, and turned in around 9. I was asleep before I could even register the crickets. But at exactly 10:05 p.m. I woke up, heart thudding like I'd been shaken awake. What stirred me wasn't natural. It was sound, a long echoing train horn. Not a sharp modern blast, but a deep, lonely moan, like something from the 1950s. It rose and faded like it was moving across the landscape. Then came a low thrum, like heavy diesel engines grinding up a slope. The tent walls pulsed with vibration. I sat up, frozen. No way. We were miles from any active track. I'd checked before we left. The closest running line was at least 15 miles south. Bill was snoring softly in his sleeping bag. He hadn't heard a thing. I lay there, rigid, listening as the rumble slowly faded into silence, like something huge had passed right by us, without ever touching ground. Next morning, I couldn't keep it to myself. At a dusty roadside diner 15 minutes from camp, I brought it up casually over eggs and toast. "Just a weird dream," I said. Sounded like a train. The waitress didn't react, but the cook, big guy with a gray beard and eyes too tired for his age, paused mid-scramble. "Train?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Sounded like it passed real close to the pond. Weird, right?" He just stared until I mentioned the old trail behind the tent, the one cut perfectly straight through the trees. Then he set the pan down, wiped his hands, and told me about Mary Karen. She used to live up here, back when there was a train that ran near Chebuncook, a once-a-week passenger line that connected to the pulp mill towns. Mary had protested when they shut it down, loved the train, said it kept the woods from swallowing everyone whole. Legend goes she chained herself to the tracks once. They found her dead 2 days later. No injuries, no exposure, just gone, like someone drained the life from her. After that, they ripped the line out, and that's when the story started. Folks said they heard a horn sometimes late at night, rumbling, voices, but no one ever saw anything. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. That night, back at the tent, I couldn't relax. The frogs and night insects chirped and hummed like normal, but the air felt different, thick, waiting. I stared at the ceiling of the tent until my eyes burned. At exactly 10:05 p.m., the forest fell quiet. No wind, no bugs, no water lapping the pond. And then it came again. The horn, low, distant, full of grief. Then the rumble. Something was moving past us again, something big. Bill stirred, mumbled, rolled over, but I didn't move. I couldn't, because I realized something. The sound wasn't passing us this time. It was slowing down. I wish I could say I let it go, that I laughed off the strange sounds and just enjoyed the fresh air, the fish, and the old company of my best friend. But the truth is, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The horn, the rumble, the way the earth had trembled under our tent. I knew what I heard, even if it didn't make sense. And that trail behind camp, the old rail bed, the one the cook had turned pale over, it started pulling at me like a hook buried deep behind my ribs. Bill noticed, of course. "You've been staring into the woods for 10 minutes, Rick," he said on the second morning. "Fish won't catch themselves." "I heard it again last night," I said, keeping my voice low, "just before 10:05. He didn't respond right away. Then, "Dreams get weird out here. You sure it wasn't the wind?" I shook my head. It was a train. I heard engines. I felt it. Later, while Bill rigged lines down by the shore, I slipped off into the trees with a small handheld recorder and my flashlight. The old trail was easy to follow once you saw it, not because it was cleared. It wasn't, but because of its unnatural straightness. It cut through the forest like a scar, bordered by tall weeds and patches of gravel swallowed by moss. I found rusted signal posts buried nearly to their necks, a cracked concrete slab with a ring bolt, maybe for equipment or something else, and in the dirt, faint outlines of what used to be railroad ties, just enough to let your mind sketch the phantom skeleton of forgotten tracks. I set the recorder on a stump near the path and marked the time. It was just after 3 in the afternoon. That night, I barely blinked after sunset. Bill turned in early, worn out from paddling the canoe. I stayed up, watching the tent clock tick toward 10:05. I had the recorder placed just outside the flap, already running. As the minutes crawled past 10, I held my breath. At exactly 10:05 p.m., everything went dead silent. No crickets, no wind, no frogs. The silence was thick, and then came the horn. It wasn't distant this time. It was close, right behind the tent. A long, groaning cry that seemed to stretch through the trees and into my bones. The ground began to tremble, and the deep hum of diesel engines followed. Louder, heavier than the night before. The tent fabric swayed not from wind, but from the pressure of something immense pushing air past our camp. I shot up. Bill stirred, groaning. "What the hell is that?" I didn't answer. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap in one motion, stepping out into the cold air. There was nothing. No train, no lights, no wind, just trees. The woods stood perfectly still, but I swear they had just moved. They had just recovered from something enormous that had passed through. The flashlight's beam caught nothing but mist and brush. Bill joined me, barefoot and irritated. "You seriously dragged me out for fog, man? You need sleep." I said nothing, because I knew something had been there. In the morning, I listened to the recording. At first, it was just insects and the occasional owl call. Then, 10 minutes in, it all died away, and then I heard it. The horn, low and resonant, echoing across the speaker like it was gliding through a canyon. Then came the engine hum, unmistakable. But that wasn't the worst part. Right after the rumble, the recording captured whispers. Dozens of voices, soft and layered, almost too quiet to make out. I played it again, over and over, and finally understood the words. "Bored now. No fare. Just time." I wish I had turned back. I wish I had just packed up and gone home when I had the chance. But that's not how it went. Something had taken hold of me, something I couldn't shake. That horn, the whispers, the way the woods felt off after dark. The old rail bed wasn't just a path anymore. It felt like a boundary, like the edge of a different world. I kept walking it every day, deeper into the overgrowth, past the ruined signal posts, the broken mile markers. Once, I found a length of track still buried in the mud, rusted to the point of crumbling. It shouldn't have been there. According to the cook, the rails were torn out decades ago. But there it was, waiting. Bill grew frustrated with me. "You're obsessed, man," he said one morning, tossing a rock into the pond. "We came to fish, not chase campfire stories." I didn't argue. I didn't even look at him. I just stared off toward the woods again, where the old crossing cut through the trees like a phantom scar. Later that day, a park ranger showed up at our camp. He was older, broad-shouldered, polite. Asked if we'd seen bear tracks or anything unusual. I don't know why, but I brought it up. "Ever hear anything strange around the pond? Like a train?" His face changed, just slightly, but enough. He scratched at his chin and said, "You're near the old lumber line. Place got shut down in the 60s. Just be careful at night, all right? Don't wander too far past the crossing." I opened my mouth to ask more, but he was already walking back toward his truck. That night, I couldn't sleep. I didn't even bother trying. I sat outside the tent with my flashlight in hand, recorder in my lap, heart ticking with the minutes. At 10:05 p.m., I felt the pressure first. The wind died, the frogs stopped, the whole forest flattened with stillness. Then the horn. This time it wasn't distant. It was right there, crying through the trees, shaking my teeth inside my skull. And then brakes, screeching metal, wheels grinding down into the earth. I stood. The air shimmered ahead, above the path, and I swear the fog parted, like something massive was pushing through it. I stepped forward, down the trail, my flashlight beam twitching as my hand shook. Just before the crossing it appeared, a full train, 2 hulking F-unit diesel locomotives, blackened by soot and time. Their headlights burned weakly, flickering like lanterns gasping for air. Behind them, 5 silver passenger cars, windows dark, bodies streaked with grime. The train sat there, waiting. Then a figure emerged from between the cars. A conductor, tall, skeletal, draped in a faded blue uniform and cap. He didn't speak, just lifted a pale, gloved hand and pointed to the open door. I don't know what made me move. I wish I could say I fought it, but I stepped forward. I climbed the steel steps, my boots scraping rust as I crossed the threshold. The door shut behind me with a hiss. I jumped, spun, nothing there, just sealed metal. Inside, the car smelled like old dust and scorched wires. The seats were all occupied, row after row of passengers, each one sitting perfectly still, their faces blank, their eyes open but lifeless. Not a single one turned to look at me. I walked the aisle slowly, my breath fogging in the cold air. "Hello?" I asked. My voice barely echoed. No one answered. I turned around, only to see the conductor standing behind me. His lips never moved, but I heard his voice in my head as clear as day. "Once you're on this train, there's no getting off." I backed away, trying the door, locked. I pounded on it, shouted for Bill, for anyone, nothing. And then the train lurched forward. There were no tracks, no rails beneath us, just weeds and gravel and forest. But the train moved, glided into the trees, carrying me into the dark. The conductor vanished, and the passengers all turned their heads slowly as one. Their eyes were empty, but their mouths started to smile. I don't remember how long I stood frozen inside that train. The hum of the engines was constant, low, vibrating through my ribs like a warning pulse. The floor beneath my boots didn't rock or sway like a real train. It felt fixed, like we were stuck between moments. But the scenery out the windows was shifting, not passing, shifting. The forest outside blurred into black fields scorched with ash. Then snow-covered plains under a red sky. Then a collapsed town, shattered storefronts, warped cars, frozen mid-crash. The glass was smeared as if something had clawed at it from the outside. I moved slowly down the aisle, hoping to find, I don't know what, an exit, a break, a person who still blinked. But they didn't. Every passenger was still seated where I'd first seen them, stone-faced and rigid, like mannequins that had forgotten how to breathe, except now their heads were tilted just slightly in my direction. Their mouths hung open, not screaming, not speaking, just waiting. I tried again. Doors, windows, even the emergency latch beneath the seat near the rear vestibule. Nothing moved. My knuckles bled from pounding against the glass. "Let me off," I shouted. "This isn't real." No one responded. Not until I turned and saw the conductor standing right behind me. He hadn't walked up. I never heard a step. One moment he wasn't there, then he was. He looked exactly the same, tall, gaunt, dust on his blue uniform like cemetery soil. He didn't blink when he whispered, "You were never meant to ride. But now the journey owns you." I backed away, but the train shuddered. The lights flickered overhead. A low hum began to rise, soft, tuneless, humming. The passengers, one by one, they joined in, their hollow voices layering into a strange, vibrating chord that made the walls tremble. I covered my ears. The windows now showed the train plunging through water, dark, brackish water, filled with silhouettes swimming just beyond sight. Some of them pressed against the glass. I ran down the aisle, past the humming figures, toward the final car. It looked older, dimmer. Its door was shut. I grabbed the handle and it opened. I didn't expect that. What lay beyond wasn't a room. It wasn't even darkness. It was pulling like wind or gravity turned sideways, a force that wanted me, dragging at my chest, my limbs, my thoughts, like drowning upward. I tried to pull back. I really did. But it took me. The last thing I remember is the conductor's voice, low and echoing from inside my own skull. "Time's up." I never made it home. Bill said I vanished sometime after 10 p.m. He reported me missing just after dawn. Search and rescue came with dogs, helicopters, drones. All they found were my footprints, leading straight up the overgrown rail bed for about half a mile. Then nothing, no more tracks, no sign of a struggle, just an old flashlight in the weeds and the dead silence of the trees. Locals still talk about it. They always bring up the train horn, how it seems to come and go with the fog. Some say it's just wind or a trick of the hills. Others know better. They say if you camp too close to the old line, you'll hear it again, right at 10:05 p.m. The whistle, the engines, the grinding brakes. And if you see it, if you see the train, don't follow the sound. Don't follow the lights. Don't board. You'll never get off. Story 2. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Montana. They always say the road changes after midnight. It's not superstition. It's something more primal. Something baked into the bones of the blacktop itself. Like the silence between heartbeats when you're truly alone. That night, I was running a load through eastern Montana, a stretch of land so flat and wide it makes you forget the sky is a ceiling. The stars were out, but dimmed by mist, like they didn't want to watch what was coming. I'd been on the road for hours. No traffic, no chatter on the CB, just the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the suspension whenever the wind shifted. I passed an old sign, sun-faded yellow, with cracked paint clinging to rusted steel. It read, Lavina, 12 miles. That's when I saw her. She stood at the edge of the road, right beneath the sign like it was her marker, a girl. Couldn't have been more than 18. She wore a long, washed-out peasant dress, the kind you only see in old photographs, muted flowers, fraying seams. Her bobbed hair clung damply to her cheeks, and she didn't move much, just raised her arm in a slow, deliberate motion. I wasn't going to stop, not out there, not that late. But something tugged at me, not guilt, not fear. It was like gravity, an unseen force nudging me to let off the gas. The truck hissed as I braked. Gravel popped under the tires as I eased to the shoulder. I watched her in the mirror. She didn't hesitate, just opened the passenger door and climbed in like she'd been waiting for me. That's when the air shifted, not colder like a storm rolling in, but still heavy and hushed. The cab, warm and familiar just seconds before, now felt like the inside of a vacuum. I felt the goosebumps before I even looked at her. She didn't speak, just closed the door gently, clicked the seatbelt, and pointed straight ahead, toward Lavina. I didn't ask her where she was from, didn't ask why she was alone. Something about her made it feel impolite to question, like waking someone from a dream you weren't meant to see. So I just drove. The tires hummed beneath us, carrying us into the dark stretch where the plains forget your name. And though I didn't know it yet, that was the last normal moment I'd have that night. She didn't say a word, just opened the cab door, stepped inside, and clicked the seatbelt like she'd done it 100 times before. The light from the dashboard traced the outlines of her dress, floral, threadbare, like something pulled from the back of a closet no one had opened in decades. She smelled faintly of rain, or maybe dust. Not unpleasant, but old, forgotten. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, fingers still. She didn't meet my eyes, didn't scan the radio or adjust the vents. She just stared out the windshield and raised one hand, slowly, pointing down the road toward Lavina. That was all the instruction I got. I shifted into drive. The wheels groaned beneath us, the highway stretching forward in a dark ribbon. For a while, I just focused on the road, the hum of the engine, the occasional flicker of passing fence posts. I tried to break the tension. "You from around here?" I asked, voice too loud in the quiet. Nothing. Long way from anywhere to be walking. Still nothing. No blink, no nod, just her face angled toward the window, pale in the greenish glow from the dash. I glanced over more than once, thought about pulling over and calling someone. But something held me in place. Not fear exactly, not pity either. It felt more like a sense of being watched back. I cleared my throat, tried again. "Lavina's not much, but I can drop you at the gas station if you're headed through." Nothing. We drove like that, two strangers, one breathing, one not, until we reached a quiet curve where the hills pulled back and the plains opened wide. The overlook, it had no signs, no lights, just a turnoff worn into gravel by years of lonely wheels. I eased my foot onto the brake. "Is this your stop?" I asked, glancing over at her, but the seat was empty. No door open, no wind, just the gentle sway of the cab and the low growl of the idling engine. The seat belt was still fastened, tucked neatly like someone had been there a moment ago. The passenger door remained locked from the inside. I sat frozen. My hands clenched the steering wheel tighter than I realized. My heart was pounding now, not from surprise, but from something deeper, more ancient. A realization that I hadn't picked up a person. I'd picked up something else. I looked in the side mirror. Nothing behind me but my own tire tracks. Then I looked at the seat again and saw just the faintest indentation, as if the cushion still remembered her weight. I slammed the brakes so hard the rig groaned like something alive. Gravel sprayed against the shoulder as I yanked the door open and jumped out, boots crunching onto the cold earth. She had to be there. I saw her. I felt her. The seat belt had been fastened. The door locked from the inside. It wasn't just imagination. It couldn't be. I aimed my flashlight across the roadside. Nothing but prairie. Endless, flat, indifferent. No trees, no fencing, no ditches deep enough to swallow a full-grown girl. Just a whole lot of nowhere, lit in harsh white as the beam swept left and right. I circled the truck, checked behind the cab, called out stupidly, "Hello? You okay?" Silence. I opened the passenger door again. The seat was still warm, still shaped. My hands were trembling now. I leaned in and pressed my palm to the upholstery. Warm, like a person had just been sitting there, but there was no trace of her. No bag, no footprints in the dirt, not even the sound of footsteps walking away. I checked the bunk and back, even knowing how ridiculous it felt. Pulled aside the curtain, empty. Still air, still shadows. I stood there a long moment, staring at the empty passenger seat, heart punching against my ribs. There were no towns nearby, no turnoffs, just open land and a 2-lane highway that swallowed you whole if you let it. I climbed back into the cab, hands clenched tight on the wheel. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't touch the heat. I just drove, each mile marker passing like the tick of some old, uncaring clock. When the sun finally cracked over the horizon, gold spilling across the wheat like spilled gasoline, the fear didn't fade. It just settled lower in my chest, like it had taken up permanent residence. I kept thinking about something an old-timer once told me in a truck stop diner outside Roundup. He was stirring sugar into his coffee, voice low like he didn't want anyone to overhear. "There's a girl out near Lavina who never makes it to town. Been thumbing rides since Disco died." At the time, I'd laughed, thought it was just another road story, something you tell new drivers to get their nerves jumping. I wasn't laughing now, because whatever I saw, whoever she was, she didn't belong to this world anymore, and she hadn't been looking for help. She'd been remembering, or maybe making sure someone else did. Back at the depot, I tried to brush it off. I unloaded the rig, filled out the manifest, even joked with the fuel tech about the vending machine eating my dollar. But the moment I sat still, really still, the cold came back. Not the kind that creeps in through your jacket, but something emptier, like the feeling you get standing on the edge of a canyon, knowing something vast and ancient is staring back. I didn't want to talk about it, but silence made it worse. So I started small, asked a dispatcher over morning coffee if he'd ever seen anything weird on Route 12. He didn't look up from his mug, just said, "You see her too?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He started describing her. Faded dress, short hair, silent as a snapped branch under snow. He'd heard the same story from at least 2 other drivers. One had quit routes east of Lavina altogether. Another only drove with a dog in the cab now. Said the animal barked every time they passed that yellow sign. A driver from the Billings Loop, Jared, I think, caught up with me outside the repair bay later that day. Lit a cigarette with shaking hands and told me what happened to him 2 years back. Same girl, same gesture. Only difference? He never stopped, just kept driving. But his CB crackled to life somewhere around mile marker 83. One word, barely audible. Please. He threw the CB in the back and didn't touch it again for a week. We never found out who she was. No missing persons report matched her description. No cold cases tied to that stretch of road. But something about her, her stillness, her silence, it lingers. Sometimes I wonder if she's looking for someone, or maybe she was someone, forgotten and left behind, repeating her last journey over and over. A loop without end, stuck between a town she never reached and the highway that never let her go. I still drive, always will. It's in my blood. But I don't take Route 12 after midnight anymore. And if I have to, if a delivery lines up just right, I leave the passenger seat buckled and the overhead light off. Because sometimes, when the wind picks up across the flats, I swear I hear fabric shift beside me. A faint, near-silent inhale, and the static on the radio stutters like it's trying to form words. I don't look. I just drive. Story 3, the Dyatlov Pass Expedition. I still remember the frost-laced windows of the train as we left Sverdlovsk. The tracks hummed beneath us like a warning we couldn't hear. Not yet. Igor stood near the carriage door, maps unrolled in his gloved hands, talking over the clatter of wheels with that steady, quiet certainty only he could summon. He traced the route with a calloused finger, eyes shining with purpose. We were 9, all young, all eager, our breath fogging in the cold as we joked, packed, planned. I sat across from Liuda, who was scribbling in her notebook again, her pencil tapping against the wood in a rhythmic twitch. Zina laughed at something Yuri said, her laughter quick and easy. Kolya leaned against the window, his eyes distant, watching the endless white sweep past like it could tell the future if only he stared long enough. Nothing about that morning felt like a final goodbye. We were too prepared, too experienced, too full of life. I remember thinking that, we've done this before, we'll do it again. The mountains were just another challenge. We didn't fear them. Not yet. But something gnawed at me. I can still feel it now. The pressure low in my chest, like I'd forgotten something vital, like a storm was gathering just beyond the reach of our eyes. There was no reason for it, no logic to it, just that stillness in the air, that deep silence under every sound. We arrived in Ivdel under heavy skies. Locals barely looked up as we passed. Their eyes followed us only after we moved on, as if they felt something we didn't. We were used to cold stares, though. Hikers are always seen as strange, especially in small towns where winter is more survival than adventure. The next morning, we strapped our skis and gear to the sled. Dyatlov gave one last check of our journals, our cameras, the route log. From here, he said, it's just us and the mountain. We laughed, some of us cheered. I smiled too, though it felt wrong. Not fake, just off, like a smile meant for a funeral. That night, under the canvas of our first pitched tent, We shared dried meat and black bread, our voices low, muffled by the wind. I lay staring up at the fabric, listening to the groan of snow shifting under weight, the trees creaking like bones in the dark. When I closed my eyes, I swear I felt something stir just beyond the range of the firelight. Not movement, something waiting. I told myself it was just nerves, the cold getting to my thoughts, but now I know better. Something was already watching us, even then, and it never blinked. The climb began with laughter. We strapped on our skis and pushed into the white. Pines stood like sentinels along our route, cloaked in frost, whispering in the wind. Our breath hung around us like ghosts. Igor kept the pace tight. Zena and I took turns leading the rear, making sure no one lagged. The cold clawed at our skin, but it wasn't the kind of cold that bothered us, not yet. Each night, the forest grew quieter, not peaceful, quiet, like something had pressed its hand over the world's mouth. And then the compass needles started to drift. At first, we thought it was the metal in our packs interfering. But it didn't stop, not even after we checked and double-checked. They spun lazily, as if the mountain itself couldn't decide where true north was. On the third night, I noticed the sound, a low hum, deep under the wind, almost like a growl, but stretched and mechanical. The others claimed they didn't hear it. I lay awake for hours listening, eyes fixed on the fabric of the tent as it pulsed faintly with each gust. Something scraped along the snow outside, slow and deliberate. Yudin fell ill the next day. Fever, shivering. He couldn't keep food down. Igor made the call to send him back. We hugged him tightly before he left, joking that he was just faking to avoid Dyatlov's schedule. But when I looked in Yudin's eyes, I saw something else. He was afraid, truly afraid. He kept glancing over his shoulder like something might follow him back down the trail. 2 days later, we found the tracks. We'd been traversing a slope under Dyatlov's leadership when Kolya shouted. There, in the fresh snow, were footprints, barefoot, human-like, but too big. We measured them, 30 centimeters. The gait was wrong, too. Long strides that ended abruptly. No return path, just gone. That night, the air changed. The wind had teeth now. It bit through our sleeping bags, whistled through the seams of the tent. We huddled together, every sound amplified. Something moved outside again, not fast, not clumsy, just curious. I lay perfectly still as the fabric of the tent bowed inward, like a hand was pressing from the outside. I held my breath, listened. A faint rasp. Nails, claws, fingers, dragging slowly down the canvas. Nobody moved. I met Igor's eyes in the dim light of his flashlight. No words. Only the wide-eyed realization that we were not alone. When morning came, we found no tracks, just wind-blown snow and silence. But the flap of the tent had small tears near the bottom. We said it was ice, wear and tear. But we knew. We kept climbing, not because we were brave, because we didn't know how to stop. The cold was always there, but that night it became something else, something alive. I woke to a sound like tearing fabric, sharp and frantic. The tent was shaking, not from wind, from something moving outside or inside. Someone screamed. I think it was Zena. But the moment shattered before it began. The flap was ripped, slashed from within. I don't remember who crawled out first. Maybe it was Igor. Maybe it was me. It doesn't matter. We didn't speak. We didn't think. We ran into the dark, into the blizzard, into the mountain's mouth. My feet hit snow barefoot. Skin split open against the crusted ice. The wind howled, but underneath it, there was something else. A sound I still can't explain. Not a voice, not an animal. Something old, grinding through the air like stone dragged over bone. Liuda clung to my arm, barefoot too, sobbing as we stumbled toward the tree line. Behind us, the tent sagged like a burst lung, half lit by the moon. I caught a glimpse of Kolya, his face twisted in panic, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Then the wind stopped, just stopped. No rustling trees, no howling storm, just silence. Too quiet, unnatural, like the world had hit pause. We made it to the trees, lit a fire with shaking hands. Fingers numb, split, bleeding, it barely caught. The branches were damp. The fire hissed like it was trying to warn us. We sat close, 6 of us then, me, Liuda, Zina, Kolya, Igor, and Thibaut. Where were the others? Nobody asked. We just stared into the flames, teeth chattering, breath rattling in our throats. Then Kolya stood up, said he saw something between the trees, a shape, just beyond the reach of the firelight. I begged him not to go. I begged. He didn't answer. He just stepped out at the light. He never came back. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had no shape anymore. I stared into the woods until my eyes ached, until the darkness blurred with the snow. Shapes moved, slow, hunched, watching, waiting. The fire died, and that silence came again. I pressed my hand to Liuda's cheek. Ice. She didn't respond. I think that was the moment something cracked in me. Not broke, cracked. A thin fault line deep inside, like the ones that hide under snow, waiting for weight to shift. The last thing I remember from that night was Zina whispering my name. Her voice didn't sound right, like it was coming through water. Then darkness, not sleep, not unconsciousness, just swallowed. And when I opened my eyes again, I was alone. Time doesn't move the same here, not anymore, not since the wind died. I remember crawling through the snow, numb, frostbitten, half blind. My fingers were blackened, stiff as branches. I had lost the others, or they had lost me. It made no difference. The mountain took us one by one, and I knew it would not stop until it was done. I found Zolotaryov and Dubinina first. I wish I hadn't. They were buried shallowly beneath the snow, as if something had tried to cover them or hide them. Their bodies were twisted, faces frozen mid-scream. Liuda's mouth was open, but there was nothing inside. Her tongue gone. Her eyes empty hollows that stared through me. Zolotaryov's ribs had collapsed inward. His chest caved like something massive had knelt on him. There were no footprints around him, no drag marks, just red snow, frozen in jagged lines like veins running through the white. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. My scream was soundless, swallowed by the same silence that had taken the wind. Later, I don't know how much later, I found Slobodin. He looked like he was smiling, but his lips were split and his skull was fractured. The ice around his head shattered like glass. His hands were outstretched, fingers clawed into the snow as if he had tried to crawl away from something. That was the worst part. All of us had been running, not from the cold, not from each other, but from something we never saw, something that never made a sound. I remember seeing shadows that didn't match our bodies, movements in the distance that stopped when I looked too long. Once, I thought I heard Igor whisper my name, but it came from beneath the snow. And then I was alone. The sky never changed. The sun hung like a coin behind gray clouds, unmoving. The world was white and dead, and I kept walking, not because I thought I'd survive. Not even because I wanted to, but because something wanted me to. Days passed, I think. I no longer counted. I had no hunger, no thirst, just cold, deep and permanent, the kind that reaches the marrow and stays. Eventually, I stopped looking for the others. They were part of the mountain now, and so was I. They never found me. Or maybe they did. Maybe they stood at the edge of the tree line, saw the prince vanish mid-stride, saw the tent sliced open, and knew better than to dig any deeper. Maybe they listened to the silence and walked away. But I'm still here, wandering the past beneath the sky that never brightens, a shadow among the drifts. Sometimes I think I hear footsteps behind me, barefoot, heavy, too far apart for any man. Sometimes I think I remember why we ran. But then the wind returns, and the memories scatter like snow, and I walk on. Story 4. The Ghost Bus of Toluca. The rain started just as the sun disappeared behind the jagged spine of the Sierra de las Cruces. I remember the way the clouds rolled in, low, fast, swollen with thunder, and how my rental car sputtered like it knew something I didn't. It died just before the Calderon curves, a winding series of switchbacks etched into the mountain's edge like a scar. The locals in Ixtapan de la Sal had warned me in hushed voices not to linger there after dark. I laughed it off. Stories about ghost buses sounded like something told around campfires, not whispered by gas station clerks with eyes too wide for comfort, but standing there, alone on the roadside, cold rain sliding down my back, I started to wonder if they weren't just stories. No signal, no passing cars, only the steady hiss of rain on pavement and the occasional groan of shifting trees in the wind. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking, camera gear heavy on my back, boots slipping on the wet asphalt. The road twisted left, then right. The guardrails rusted and broken in places. Below, the ravine dropped into shadow, black as pitch. I kept my eyes ahead, focusing on each cautious step. That's when I saw the lights. Headlights, dull and yellow through the mist, rising out of the curve ahead. They cut through the fog like twin eyes glowing from something ancient. I stepped back instinctively as the vehicle came into view. It was a bus, not just any bus. This one was green and yellow, its paint weathered but unmistakable, its windows fogged, its tires silent on the road. It made no noise as it approached, not even the squish of rubber over rain-slick asphalt. And then, without warning, it stopped beside me. The door hissed open. No driver spoke, no engine idled, but the door remained open like an invitation waiting to be accepted. I should have turned and run. Instead, I stepped aboard, and the door closed behind me. The bus door shut behind me with a breathless hiss, sealing the world out in one motion. The instant it closed, the rain seemed to vanish, as if I'd stepped into a place untouched by weather or time. I stood near the front, dripping, shivering. The interior light flickered once, then steadied into a sickly yellow glow. The driver, if you could call him that, sat motionless behind the wheel. His face was hidden in shadow beneath the brim of a cap, hands resting on the wheel like sculptures. He didn't speak, didn't look at me. I murmured a soft, "Thanks," but the word died before it reached my own ears. Every seat behind him was taken. Row after row, the bus was full, men in suits, women in dresses, children in coats and school uniforms. Not one of them moved. They weren't sleeping, not exactly. Their eyes were open, staring ahead, unfocused and glassy. I froze, hand still clutching the metal rail. The silence pressed in, dense and absolute. No creak of leather, no breath, no cough, just nothing. Only one seat was empty, third row on the left. It faced me like it knew I'd be coming. I took it. The cushion sagged under me, cold and damp, and for a moment I swore I heard the whisper of something shifting under the floor. But I didn't move. I couldn't. The engine rumbled to life, slow and mechanical, as if dragged from sleep. It didn't roar. It groaned. Outside the window, mist curled like smoke around the bus. The world was disappearing into it, swallowed by white and gray. The road ahead was more suggestion than structure. I looked at the man across the aisle. He wore a double-breasted coat from another era. His skin was pale, almost gray. His lips moved slowly, like trying to form a word underwater, but no sound came out. I blinked. He was still again, silent, still staring. I turned to ask the driver where we were going, but when I opened my mouth, no sound escaped, not even a rasp. My voice had abandoned me. I glanced down at my hands. They were still wet with rain, but my fingertips were pale, wrinkled as if I'd been underwater for hours. Time lost its shape. The road outside was endless. No turns, no towns, just fog, and the rhythmic hum of tires gliding over wet asphalt. Yet I never felt the bus move. It was like we weren't going forward, just deeper. I tried to check my watch. It had stopped. The second hand twitched once every few minutes, then sat still again. And the others, none blinked, not once. Neither did I. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? The fog outside thickened until it pressed against the glass like something alive, like it wanted in. But the true cold didn't come from beyond the windows. It came from the aisle. It crept up slowly, like frost over a window pane, numbing my legs first, then my fingers. I could see my breath now, short bursts of vapor that seemed to hang in the air too long, like the bus didn't want to let them go. I rubbed my hands together, but the friction gave no warmth, and then I felt it. Eyes, not from the driver, not from the passengers, from somewhere deeper, beneath the floor or behind the walls. Something was watching me, not curious, not angry, just patient. I shifted in my seat. That was when I noticed the changes. The man across the aisle wore a gray suit that looked sharp when I first saw him. Now it was dusted with ash, a tear down the side exposing charred fabric beneath. The woman beside him wore a dress that belonged in the 1960s. It looked soaked, muddy at the hem, and the child 3 rows ahead. He turned his head toward me, only slightly, just enough for me to see the faintest smile curve across his lips. There was something red near his chin. Blood, a slow trickle, barely visible in the dim light. His eyes met mine. Then he blinked, and just like that, the blood was gone, his face neutral, head forward again. I wanted to stand, I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the seat was pulling me inward, absorbing me. Outside, the fog parted for a moment. I caught a glimpse of something familiar. Broken road signs, rusted rails, the outline of the bridge, the Calderon Bridge, the one the bus had gone off all those years ago. It looked just like in the photos I'd seen online. Narrow, decaying, warped from time and disuse, and it was ahead of us. We were heading straight toward it. I tried to shout, to warn the driver, but no sound came out. I pressed my hands to the window. My fingers left no prints, just cold. The lights inside flickered again. This time, they didn't return fully. Patches of the aisle went dark. Shadows spilled upward from the floor like smoke. One by one, The passengers turned to look at me. Their faces hadn't changed. Not exactly, but their expressions had. Their features sagged, hollowed like masks wilting in heat. Where eyes should have been, there were dim, gray voids. And they were all watching me now, all but one. The seat beside me was still empty. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to see what waited there, but my head turned anyway. The cushion was worn, old, and now it wasn't empty anymore. A faint impression had formed there, as if something invisible had just sat down. Then came the whisper, right in my ear, breathless, cold, familiar. We're almost home. I turned toward the front just in time to see the bridge looming ahead, rotting, broken, and wrapped in fog thick as smoke. The driver's hands gripped the wheel again, and the bus began to speed up. The wheels screamed. The sound wasn't metal. No, it was something deeper. A howl, a wail, like the bus itself remembered the crash and was crying out as it relived it. The fog swallowed the road completely, and the world beyond the windshield was white. Except for the bridge. I saw it, broken, skeletal, swaying like a corpse hanging from the last thread of rope. We hit it. The frame of the bus shuddered violently. I gripped the seat in front of me, but my fingers sank through it as if I were grabbing smoke. My body was still there, solid, cold, but the world around me had shifted into something less than real, or more than real. I don't know. I turned to the driver. He still didn't look at me, but he spoke. His lips never moved. The voice came from behind my eyes, or maybe from the floor beneath my feet. Welcome back. Every passenger turned, all at once. Heads snapping like marionettes pulled by a single string, faces hollow, no eyes, just pits of ash. Some mouths hung open like they were screaming, but no sound came. I stared ahead, heart hammering, but even that felt distant, like it wasn't mine. The bridge groaned, planks cracked, bolts tore loose from rotted concrete. Then we fell. No braking, no swerving. The driver never touched the wheel. The whole bus tilted forward as though gravity had simply remembered we didn't belong. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The passengers just sat, still facing forward, their mouths hanging wider now, wider than a human face should stretch, like rubber peeled back to the bone. The ravine opened to meet us. Time froze. I saw fire before we hit it, a flash of heatless orange flickering inside the windows like a memory. I was no longer sitting. I was suspended, floating. The seats stretched away, the bus warping, cracking, breaking apart in total silence. Not the kind of silence where there's no sound, but the kind that smothers it. Darkness swallowed me. Then air. Hard gravel bit into my back. I choked, gasped, and bolted upright. A bird screamed overhead. Dawn bled over the mountains like a slow wound. I was lying just off the Calderon Road, alone. The bus was gone. But when I staggered to the edge of the cliff, knees shaking, vision blurry, I saw something far below, nestled in the ravine like it had never left. The charred skeleton of a bus, half crushed, still smoking in the morning light. I called for help. My phone worked. It hadn't the night before, but now the signal bars were full. A rescue crew from a nearby town arrived by midday. An old man stood among them, wrinkled hands shoved into a coat pocket. He didn't ask questions, didn't look surprised. He just stared at me, eyes heavy with something I couldn't name, and whispered, "You wrote it, didn't you?" I couldn't speak. He pointed to the wreckage in the canyon. It always comes for one, and now it's gone again. They gave me water, asked for my name, but I couldn't stop staring at the road, that curve, the spot where the mist first parted, where the headlights appeared. They say no one ever rides the ghost bus of Toluca twice. But some nights, when sleep finally finds me, I hear the hiss of its doors, the groan of the tires, the hum of that cursed engine just beneath the floor. And in those dreams, there's always an empty seat waiting beside me, still warm, still watching, still waiting. Diego Alvarez, Story 5, The Vanishing Town. I arrived just before dusk. The road behind me had long turned to gravel, then to packed snow, and finally to silence. Nothing but the creak of my boots and the hum of wind in my ears. The Rockies stood behind me like ancient sentinels, their white peaks blushing with the dying light. The ghost town appeared without warning, as if it had always been there, waiting. The first thing I noticed was how wrong the air felt. It wasn't just the cold, it was the weight, like walking into a room just after someone left, or just before they returned. Cabins lined the snow-covered street, leaning inward like brittle old men gossiping over forgotten secrets. Their roofs sagged with the years, chimneys crooked like broken necks. I passed one house where a dinner table still stood beneath a shattered window. Plates were set, knives and forks arranged. A frozen roast remained in the center, untouched, preserved by time and the eternal frost. I ducked beneath a fallen beam to step inside. Dust hadn't settled the way it should have. The corners were clean, like someone or something kept watch. My breath hung in the air, puffing in small anxious clouds. A rusted kettle sat on the stove. I tapped it. It rang hollow, but there was still something inside. I didn't look. Further down the street, snow drifted over cracked wagons and skeletal fence posts. A faded sign above a door read, "General Store." The door hung askew, groaning with each gust. Inside, shelves held glass jars filled with strange dark things curled at the bottom. Tins labeled coffee, salt, and gunpowder still stood, though the lettering had all but worn away. A child's shoe rested beneath the counter, toes pointing toward the back room. I didn't go in. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched long and thin like claw marks across the snow. I should have turned back then, but I didn't. Curiosity pushed me deeper, past the old blacksmith shop and a collapsed church steeple, all the way to the town's heart. There, at the crossroads of two skeletal streets, I paused. The silence wasn't empty. It was listening. I heard a creak, just one, and turned sharply toward the inn at the street's end. The sign above it, barely hanging, read, "The Eagle Inn." The windows reflected nothing. No sky, no mountains, not even me. I stood there for a moment, boots half buried in snow, feeling more like an intruder than a guest. Then I heard something behind me, a faint rustle, a crunch of snow. I turned. There was no one there. But from the inn, a curtain twitched, and I knew I wasn't alone in the vanishing town. It had been less than an hour since I crossed into the town, but time didn't move the same way here. The sun had stalled behind the mountains, as though unsure whether to sink or stay. I kept walking, deeper into the snow-laced skeleton of this place. That's when I saw it. On the bench outside, what might have once been a schoolhouse. A battered journal, its leather spine warped and frayed, half buried in snow. The wind played with the pages, flipping them gently like fingers skimming memories. I picked it up. Most of the entries were water-damaged, ink blurred like smudged tears. Grocery lists, names, A brief note about the mayor falling ill. Then, halfway through, something strange. A child's handwriting, sharp and erratic in red crayon. The boy is near. The words had been underlined 3 times. I stared at the page, feeling my fingers go numb. Not from the cold, but something else. The wind stopped. That's when I heard it. Thump. A soft, distant sound. Thump, thump, like rubber on snow. I turned. At the far end of the street, beyond a collapsed wagon, a figure stood just in view. Small, still, head tilted slightly like it was listening to me. A child. He wore a red jacket, the kind you'd see in old catalogs, too bright against the gray world around him. A ball bounced once beside him. I called out. My voice didn't echo. It just died. The boy turned and walked behind the wagon. I ran. The snow dragged at my boots, breath tearing from my chest. But when I reached the cart, he was gone. No prints, no ball. Just silence again, heavier than before. I stood there disoriented, heart hammering in my ears. Then I remembered the words of the inn's caretaker from an old interview I'd found in the archives. "Oh, that little boy," she'd whispered. "I hate it when I see him. That's how I know I've stayed too long." She'd said he always showed up in the same way, around a corner, just enough to make you think you could follow, just enough to make you stay. I turned around to head back, but something caught my eye. On the wall of a nearby house, scratched into the wood, beneath layers of flake paint, was another line in a child's hand. "He's not playing. He's waiting." The light was fading fast. I felt like I was being led, drawn forward by something that had never truly left. My hand still held the journal. I didn't remember deciding to keep it, but there it was. I tucked it into my coat. The air around me had gone too still, like the town was holding its breath. I should have left then, but the Eagle Inn was just up the road, and its door was open. I should have kept walking, should have turned back the moment I lost sight of the boy behind that cart. But instead, I found myself at the door of the Eagle Inn. It stood alone at the far end of the street, 3 stories of sagging wood and frost-bitten shutters. The porch moaned beneath my weight as I stepped onto it. Snow had gathered in piles against the frame, untouched by the footprints, but somehow disturbed, as if something had passed through without touching the ground. The front door was open, just enough to let in the cold and the quiet. I pushed it the rest of the way. The hinges wailed. Inside, the inn was a decaying monument to lives suddenly paused. Cobwebs hung like curtains. A grandfather clock stood still at 4:37. Faint marks were etched into the floor near the front desk, like a suitcase had once been dragged hastily toward the stairs. But there were no suitcases left. I lit my lantern. The glow cast long, unnatural shadows. I told myself I'd rest a while, just long enough to warm up and gather my nerves. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt eyes on me, not from behind, from above. Whispers, barely audible at first. Just the creak of old wood, I thought, the sigh of settling dust. But the longer I stayed still, the clearer they became. Children's voices, dozens, whispers in overlapping tones, like they were playing some game I wasn't meant to understand. Then, unmistakably, laughter. It came from upstairs. Every part of me screamed not to go, but my legs moved anyway. The stairs groaned under each step. At the top landing, the hallway stretched into darkness. Most of the doors were open, revealing only cold beds and peeling wallpaper. Except one. Room 24. The door was shut. I took a step closer. The lantern dimmed. I reached for the knob, but before I touched it, the door creaked open with a long, groaning breath. A draft curled out, smelling of dust and wet wood. Inside, it was black. Unnaturally so. My lantern barely pierced it. Something moved. The corner of the room shifted slightly, then stilled. That's when the giggling returned, soft, high-pitched, too close. It didn't come from ahead of me. It came from behind. I turned fast, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back, the lantern flickered violently. A child's rocking chair in the room had started to move. Slow, deliberate arcs, forward and back. No one sat in it. I couldn't breathe. I don't know how long I stood there. A second? A full minute? Then the lantern blew out. Silence. Total, complete silence. When I finally fumbled for my lighter and sparked the flame, the room was exactly as before. Still decaying, empty. The chair had stopped moving, but etched into the dust on the window was a new message. He likes it when they come upstairs. I backed out slowly, never turning my back to the room. Once downstairs, I forced the door shut and wedged a broken chair against it. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not with footsteps creeping above me in a building that only had 2 floors. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. The whispers above room 24 never stopped. Sometimes I'd hear giggles cut short, like someone had placed a hand over a mouth mid-laugh. Other times, the sound of dragging something soft and slow across the floor directly over my head. But the Eagle Inn had no 3rd floor. Every time I checked the stairs, they ended where they always had. Still, the sounds moved, as if the ceiling itself had shifted. At one point in the night, I stood at the base of the staircase with my lantern raised high, listening. The air was so cold it pinched my lungs. The flame danced, stretched, and dimmed, and then I heard it. A ball, bouncing, one soft thud, then another, closer, closer. I didn't wait to see what came after. Back in the room downstairs, I started packing, hands shaking. The walls felt closer now. My breath fogged the air, though I'd stoked the small iron stove. I paused only once, when I noticed a child's handprint slowly fading on the inside of the frosted window. Inside. I grabbed my pack. The moment I opened the front door, the wind hit me like a scream. But the night was dead still, no clouds, no storm, just the howl of something that wasn't there. I stepped into the street and made my way back toward the edge of the valley, keeping my lantern low. The town behind me looked different, darker, sharper somehow, like the buildings had grown eyes. Then I saw them, footprints, fresh ones, in the snow right beside mine, matching every step. And I hadn't moved since I came out. I stopped. So did they. I turned. No one. Nothing. But the ball lay in the center of the road, motionless. Red leather, wet from snow. I hadn't seen it before. I didn't pick it up. I ran. The edge of the valley felt impossibly far. The wind bit through my coat. The shadows moved wrong, jerky, flickering like old film. Once, I glanced at a window near the bakery ruins and saw a small shape staring out. Faded red jacket, white face, still. At dawn, I finally crossed the ridge. The moment I passed the last tree, the air changed. Lighter, as if something had unclenched. But I never turned back. Not until later, weeks later, when I saw a photograph online. A traveler had posted it, bragging about finding a real ghost town in the Rockies. The photo showed the Eagle Inn behind him, its roof barely holding. But it wasn't the end that made my stomach twist. It was the window. Room 24. A figure stood there, small, perfectly still, wearing red, one hand on the glass. People say the town is cursed, that it's empty, that it belongs to the past. They're wrong. It's not empty. It just waits. And once you see the boy, you don't go home alone. Story 6. Midnight on Bride Bridge. I was 200 miles from anything familiar, the kind of distance where headlights become the only company you trust. Northern Wisconsin in early October had a way of swallowing sound, and people, if you listen to the stories. I hadn't expected the road to feel this hollow, like something had scooped out the middle of the night and left just fog and silence behind. My guidebook sat on the passenger seat, dog-eared and creased from miles of thumbing. It promised a string of roadside oddities and haunted stretches of highway that cut through pine-choked hills. The kind of trip I thought would make a good story, something to shake me loose from the stale rhythm of my life. But I hadn't expected the air to feel this wrong. The pages had warned about this route, how the northern highways could lull a person into strange thoughts. The fog moves like it remembers, one line read, and some things don't want to be forgotten. I laughed when I first read it, but now, past midnight, my laughter stuck in my throat. The road was ribbon-thin, barely visible through the fog. My headlights flared against the mist and carved pale tunnels through the dark, casting every tree as a looming figure. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. Something about this stretch felt stretched, like time had lost its grip out here. There were signs, too, the kind you don't pay attention to until your instincts are screaming at you. A road marker tilted the wrong way, a rusted car husk half hidden in the underbrush, a crow sitting too still on a branch, watching me pass like it knew where I was headed. The book mentioned them, ghosts without faces, beasts that weren't entirely animal, lights that hovered like curious insects made of flame. I read it all. I even underlined parts, a joke at the time. But now I kept checking my mirrors. And the silence wasn't silent. It was listening. The bridge came into view without warning, just as the book said it would. No signs, no lights, just a rise in the road and a curve of old iron. I knew it instantly. Bloody Bride Bridge. That was the name locals gave it. The story went that a bride died on her way to her wedding here, crashed in a white dress, the veil tangled in the windshield, blood on the satin. I don't know what compelled me to pull over, curiosity maybe, or the thought that if I just looked, just saw it for myself, I could shake this growing unease. So I eased the car to the shoulder, grabbed my phone, and stepped out. The cold hit like a slap. Not just air, but something heavier. My breath fogged the moment it left my mouth, and I swear I felt eyes on me, deep in the trees or maybe above. The bridge groaned under its own weight as I walked a few steps forward. My phone's flash flickered once, then stayed on. I raised it, snapped a photo of the iron railings, and that's when I heard it. A shift, like someone moving behind me. I froze. The car was right there, just feet away, but I didn't turn immediately. I couldn't. My body wouldn't obey. The air was suddenly wet with silence, like the world was holding its breath. Then I did the one thing you never do in these stories. I looked in the rearview mirror. A face, pale, blurred like breath on glass, pressed right up against the back window. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no figure, just the fog rolling over the bridge thick enough to taste. My heart jackhammered in my chest as I dove back into the driver's seat. And that's when I heard it, the click. The passenger door, it had just unlocked itself. I didn't look. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the rear view, trying to convince myself that the face I saw was some trick of light or nerves. Then I saw it. On the back seat, a single white rose, fresh, dew still clinging to the petals. I didn't scream. I just moved, slammed the car into drive, my hands slick on the wheel, the tires squealing on the damp asphalt. I didn't stop to question any of it. I just drove, faster than I should have. The fog swallowed the taillights behind me, and the bridge vanished in my rear view. But the feeling didn't. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I should have kept driving. The moment I stepped out onto the bridge, the air changed. It wasn't just cold. It felt unnatural, like I'd crossed into somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. The wind didn't move the trees. The fog didn't drift. Everything had gone still. Too still. I shut the car door behind me and walked toward the rusted iron railing. My boots echoed against the damp planks, every step louder than it should have been. The bridge groaned under its own weight, or maybe under mine. My fingers trembled as I raised my phone to snap a photo. The flash lit up a column of mist, then flickered out. It was quiet, but not empty. I stood there longer than I meant to. The river beneath whispered like distant voices just under hearing range. I told myself it was the wind through the trusses, or maybe my nerves turning shadows into shapes. I'd come here because I wanted to see something, right? That's what I thought, until I did. A shift in the silence made me glance over my shoulder. No one. But I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched, closely, the kind of stare you feel on the back of your neck. I turned back to the car and started toward it, quickening my pace without realizing it. I opened the door, slid behind the wheel, and locked the doors out of habit. Then I looked in the rearview mirror and froze, a face, pale, software wrong, like it didn't belong to a living person. Eyes wide and too dark, lips barely parted like they'd been caught mid-breath. Pressed against the inside of the glass just inches behind me. I spun around so fast my seatbelt caught me. Nothing. The back seat was empty. The air felt like it had dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in shaky clouds. My hands fumbled for the ignition, though the engine was still idling. Click. The passenger door unlocked itself. I hadn't touched anything. A mechanical clunk, too deliberate to be random. My skin crawled. I turned my head, slow as if I could delay what I might see. The door was still shut, but something had been there. I turned to the back again, and that's when I saw it. A white rose laid gently across the middle of the seat, stem perfectly straight, petals pale as bone. There was moisture on the seat beneath it, like it had just been placed there from someone's hand. But I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard anyone enter. Nothing. And yet, it was there. I stared at it for too long. Then I reached back and threw the rose onto the roadside gravel with a trembling hand, slammed the car into drive, and peeled away from the bridge like it was burning behind me. I didn't look in the mirror again, not for a long while, not even when the road curved and dipped through the trees again, the fog turning thick enough to blur the line between the real and something older. I couldn't shake the image of the face in the mirror. how it seemed to want something. It hadn't just been watching me, it had been waiting. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that the rose was a prank, or maybe something I'd missed before I got in the car. But deep down, I already knew. It had followed me. Whatever haunted that bridge wasn't stuck there anymore. I thought I'd left it behind. After the bridge, the face, the rose, the cold, my only goal was to reach the next town and find somewhere, anywhere, with lights and people. I didn't care about the rest of the guidebook. Not anymore. But sometimes, even when you're trying to outrun something, the road curves back toward it. That's what happened when I saw the wooden sign. Boy Scout Lane. Dead end. I didn't plan to turn. I didn't even realize I had until the wheel shifted in my hands, almost like muscle memory. But I'd never been here before. The road narrowed, wrapped in a tunnel of trees, branches arching overhead like ribs. Fog thickened again, curling across the asphalt. My headlights barely pushed back. It was dead quiet. Even the crickets had gone silent. The guidebook had a page on this place. I remembered it suddenly, the words as clear as if I were reading them again. Legend tells of a troop of scouts who vanished one night. No bodies, no clues, just stories. Now people say they hear laughter in the woods, long after dark. I told myself I'd turn around, just up ahead, just around the next bend. But curiosity, or something else, kept me creeping forward. That's when I heard it. Giggles, faint, playful, wrong. Not like kids laughing at a joke. It was closer to mimicry, like something pretending it knew what laughter sounded like, and it was coming from the trees. I slowed the car, my knuckles white on the wheel. Fog shifted around the hood like smoke. My eyes darted between the windshield and the mirror, my chest tightening. More laughter, echoing now, crisscrossing from one side of the road to the other. Then a snap, a rustle, movement in the dark. I flipped my hazards on. Don't ask me why, as if blinking lights could scare away whatever was out there. I leaned forward, scanning the woods. Then my headlights caught something, an old maple just off the shoulder, its bark twisted in a pattern that, for the briefest moment, looked like a face. Round, grinning, winking, and then it was gone. Just bark again, just a tree. I hit the gas. Branches scraped the side of my car as I swung it around, barely missing a ditch. I didn't stop to listen. I didn't stop to think. But just before the road opened back up to the highway, the laughter came back. Louder this time, right up against the windows. High-pitched, glitchy, and angry. Then silence. Dead, ringing silence. When I reached the main road again, my breath was shallow. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the heat of it on my cheeks. My hazards were still blinking. I shut them off with a trembling hand, and then I looked behind me. The road was empty. Boy Scout Lane sat still and waiting, swallowed by trees. But as I pulled away, something caught my eye in the mirror. Not a figure this time, just movement. A branch swaying where there was no wind. I didn't look again. I should have turned around, should have stopped the moment I left Boy Scout Lane and found a place to breathe, to think, to stop shaking. But I didn't. I kept going deeper into the fog. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon through a forgotten world. No lights, no houses, just trees pressing close, muffling the world. My knuckles were stiff on the wheel, and I didn't realize how cold it had gotten until I saw the frost creeping along the inside of the windshield. The heater was already on, blasting, but my breath still fogged the glass. And then I felt it again, that presence. I didn't want to look, but some part of me had to. My eyes shifted to the rear view. The back seat was empty at first, but then I saw it, lying there again. The white rose, exactly where it had been before. Perfect, undisturbed. Only this time, it wasn't alone. The seat had a slight indentation, as if someone were sitting there. Not a stain, not a shadow, a weight. The cushion bowed in ever so slightly, and my mouth went dry. I didn't want to blink. I didn't want to move. The air turned sharp, like breathing in ice. Then the radio crackled, static bleeding in over the music I hadn't even realized was playing. It twisted into something else. A melody, broken, warped, a wedding march. Slow, like it was being played underwater or remembered by something that had forgotten how music worked. I reached for the knob, but the volume surged before my fingers got there. Then a whisper, software right behind my ear. "Don't leave me." I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to the shoulder, tires screaming against the wet pavement. My chest felt too small for my lungs. I sat frozen, staring at the frost-covered windshield, the music still warbling in the background. I didn't dare look behind me. I opened the door and stumbled into the fog. Cold bit through my sleeves. I forced myself to turn and look at the back seat. It was empty. The rose was gone again. No imprint, no whisper, only silence. But it didn't feel over. It didn't feel gone. Not really. I made it to the roadside motel about 20 minutes later. One of those old L-shaped places tucked behind a gas station. The kind where the sign hums and the lights buzz like flies. I parked under the dim canopy and killed the engine. The air was still too cold. My hand still trembled as I stepped out. I checked the back seat before I closed the door. Empty. Still, I didn't breathe easy. Not until I made it inside the room. I dropped my bag on the floor, locked the door, and peeled off my damp jacket. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't even bother with the lights right away. I just sat on the edge of the bed and tried to forget the things I'd seen. The face in the mirror, the laughter in the trees, the unseen weight beside me. I got up to unpack. That's when I saw it. My suitcase was unzipped. I hadn't done that. Inside, neatly tucked beneath my folded clothes, was the white rose. Just one. Still fresh. Still perfect. I didn't scream. I didn't touch it. I sat on the bed and stared at it for a long time, listening to the stillness settle around me. Some roads don't just remember the dead, they carry them, and sometimes they let them follow you home. Story 7. Whispers at Lake Crescent. I used to think silence was peaceful. That was before Lake Crescent. We arrived just after dawn, the sky awash in washed-out lavender and gray. A low fog hovered over the still surface, and the cedars lining the lake stood like sentinels, unmoving. There was no bird song, no wind, not even the faint hum of insects. Just the sound of our boots crunching over damp pebbles as Jack and I set up camp along the gravel shore. "Creepy how calm it is," I murmured. Jack didn't respond right away. He was staring across the water, then said, almost too casually, "You know this place has a story, right?" I gave him a sideways look. Of course it did. Places like this always do. They say on still nights, she walks the lake. The lady, drowned over a century ago. Her body was found perfectly preserved years later. Cold water does that. I shrugged it off, but his words settled into me like a weight. I'd read the same story online before the trip. A woman vanished in the early 1900s, and when her body surfaced decades later, it hadn't aged a day. Since then, hikers and boaters reported seeing a pale figure gliding across the water, especially when the air was still. I zipped the tent and went to the water's edge, dipping my hand into the lake. It was colder than I expected, too cold. A few yards out, something broke the surface, a splash, quick and sharp. I stood, heart lurching, but the lake was smooth again, not a ripple in sight. Jack joined me with 2 enamel mugs of tea. "You okay?" "Thought I heard something." "Probably a fish," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We left camp not long after, taking one of the narrower trails winding through the surrounding rainforest. The trees loomed, their trunks slick with moss and lichen, their roots twisting like veins beneath the forest floor. Everything dripped, every sound, our steps, the wind, even our breath, felt muffled by the green and the mist. It didn't burn off, it clung, it draped the branches like a veil and wrapped around us, distorting space and sound. At one point, Jack stopped and turned. "You hear that?" I listened. Silence. "Nothing," I said, but that wasn't quite true. The silence was too deep, too deliberate, like everything in the forest was holding its breath. We pressed on until mid-afternoon. The farther we went, the more the trees seemed to close in. I kept thinking I saw movement in the shadows, but every time I looked, it was just branches swaying, if they were swaying at all. The stillness was unnatural. At a clearing, we stopped for water. Jack glanced up at the sky, then frowned. "Storm coming," he said. I followed his gaze. The sky above the trees was gray, but no clouds moved. No wind picked up. We turned back toward camp. Neither of us said much. We didn't have to. The silence had started to feel like something alive, like it was watching us, waiting. Back at the lake, the air was heavier. The surface, still as glass, reflected the pale sky. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I saw our tent exactly where we left it. "Thought for a second it wouldn't be here," Jack said with a nervous chuckle. That night, we sat by a small fire on the shore. The lake was dark now, really dark, like ink. The only light came from the fire and a few faint stars overhead. The silence had returned, deeper than before. I stared at the far shore. There were no cabins, no campsites, no trails, just the woods. And then I saw it, a shape, pale and upright. It seemed to drift just above the shoreline, barely moving. I blinked. It was still there. "Jack," I whispered. He looked where I pointed. I felt him freeze beside me. "Do you see?" "Yeah," he said quickly. The figure didn't move toward us. It didn't wave. It just stood, watching. And then, like mist dissolving, it was gone. We didn't speak again that night. We doused the fire, climbed into the tent, and lay there listening. Outside, the wind began to rise, brushing the tent's fabric in soft, rhythmic flutters. But every so often, when the breeze paused, I heard something else. My name, whispered low and far off. It came again, quieter. Jack's breathing slowed beside me. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he wasn't. I kept my eyes closed, not because I was tired, because I didn't want to see what might be standing outside. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted until then. The legends weren't just stories. Lake Crescent doesn't forget the dead. It waits. And now it knew our names. We set out early, hoping movement might shake the strange weight that had settled over us since the night before. The air was cool, and a pale sun filtered weakly through the overcast sky. Jack suggested the whole river trail, an old-growth forest path deeper into the Olympic wilderness. might help clear our heads, he said. But the forest didn't feel like it wanted us there. The trees along the trail were impossibly tall, their trunks wide and slick with moisture. Moss hung like drapery from the branches, and the ground squished beneath our boots, soft and waterlogged. Every direction was green, deep, wet green that swallowed the trail behind us and blurred the path ahead. Feels like walking into a painting, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Jack nodded, though his gaze kept flicking to the trees. It's quiet, he murmured. It was. Too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrels chittering, not even the whisper of wind through the canopy. Just the rhythmic thud of our footsteps, which began to sound less like footsteps and more like intrusions. About an hour in, we stopped to rest. Jack took a swig from his water bottle, then cocked his head. What was that? I held my breath. Then we heard it again. Laughter. A high, light giggle. Childlike, but wrong. It echoed strangely through the trees like it didn't belong in this time, this place. Jack stood still, eyes scanning the underbrush. I followed his gaze, heart stuttering. Through a break in the maples, I saw movement. A boy, small, darting between the trees. His bare feet barely touched the moss as he ran. His clothes were wrong, too formal, too old-fashioned, maybe turn of the century, like something out of a faded photograph. Did you? I started. I saw him, Jack whispered. Then the boy was gone, just like that. No footsteps, no sound of breaking twigs, only the hush of a forest that felt suddenly alive. We both stood there, not moving, barely breathing. That's when I remembered. Thunder Knob, another Pacific Northwest trail, another ghost story. I'd read it late one night. Hikers reported hearing laughter before storms. A child, they said. A little boy who had vanished years ago. Some said he drowned. Others claimed he wandered off into the trees and never returned. Jack looked up at the sky. Do you hear that? A low rumble rolled over us, distant but unmistakable. We hadn't seen a single cloud all morning. The wind picked up suddenly, stirring the ferns in sharp, uneasy flutters. It felt purposeful, like it was pushing us back away from something we hadn't yet seen. Neither of us said it aloud, but we turned around, retracing our steps without another word. The trail seemed longer on the way back, the trees more twisted, leaning in too closely. I felt like we were being funneled, not just leaving, but guided out. That laugh came again, closer this time, almost behind us. I didn't look back. By the time we reached camp, the light had shifted. Clouds had moved in silently, dimming the day to an early dusk. The fire pit was damp. Our tent stood exactly as we left it, but I checked the zippers anyway. Jack tried to act like everything was fine. He busied himself cleaning gear, adjusting stakes. But I noticed the way his hand shook when he thought I wasn't watching. That night, we kept the fire low. I sat near it, facing the woods, trying to listen past the wind that now moved steadily through the trees. Jack came over, sat beside me. We didn't imagine that, he said. No, I replied. We didn't. Neither of us mentioned the boy again, but every time the fire crackled, I flinched, waiting for laughter to slip through the sound. Sleep came late, if at all. The trees whispered all night. Leaves rustled, branches swayed, but nothing touched our tent. Nothing needed to. The forest had already shown us its voice. And we had listened. By the time the sun fell behind the mountains, the light over Lake Crescent had taken on an almost metallic sheen. cool, pale, and heavy. We tried to keep busy around camp, cooking a simple meal and double-checking the tent stakes, but every movement felt performative, like we were pretending not to notice how the air had changed. The stillness was back, worse than that first morning. The water was glass again. Not a ripple, not a sound. The only movement came from the smoke of our small fire, curling up into a windless sky. Jack sat across from me, staring into the flames, hands laced tightly in his lap. "I keep thinking about last night," I said. "The figure across the lake." He nodded slowly. "She was real. I saw her too." We didn't say much after that. What else could we say? Eventually, Jack stood and walked down to the shoreline. I stayed by the fire, watching the dark lake stretch outward like a mirror to nothing. A strange fog began to form near the far shore, low and lazy, but too thick for how early it still was. That's when I saw her again. She moved with a gliding, disjointed grace, a tall white form pacing the bank just beyond the fog. Her clothes billowed in an unseen wind, long and pale like old lace. She didn't walk so much as drift, as if her feet never touched the earth. I opened my mouth to call Jack, but I didn't have to. He was already looking, frozen. The figure paused, turned slightly. Her face was obscured. No eyes, no features. Just a pale blur where identity should have been. The fire hissed suddenly. A gust of wind came from the woods, bending the trees behind me. The air snapped cold. When I looked back toward the lake, she was gone. "Into the fog," Jack whispered. "She just disappeared." He was pale, hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then came the rustling. Not wind this time. Movement. Slow, deliberate, just beyond the tree line. I grabbed the lantern and turned toward the forest. Shadows darted at the edge of the light, never fully forming. Branches moved independently of the wind. Shapes flickered behind the trees, appearing and vanishing in rhythm with the crackle of the fire. Something was watching. "Put it out," Jack said, already reaching for the water. "Put the fire out." We doused the flames in silence. The world darkened instantly, save for the dull blue of twilight and the growing mist over the lake. We climbed into the tent and zipped it tight. I could barely breathe. Inside it was quiet, too quiet, but not peaceful. It was the quiet that comes before something. The moment before the knock, before the scream, before the ground breaks beneath your feet. I lay still, clutching the sleeping bag around me. Jack was beside me, eyes open, staring at the nylon ceiling. Neither of us spoke. Then came the wind again. It circled the tent slowly, rustling the fabric just enough to make us feel surrounded. I pressed my ear to the side, listening. Whispers, so faint I wasn't sure they were real. They slipped between gusts, syllables that didn't belong to any language I knew. A voice just beneath comprehension, just under the threshold of waking. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Jack turned his head toward me. "It said my name." I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Jack. We stayed awake in the dark, listening to the wind call our names. The lake, still and black, just beyond the canvas wall. I kept thinking about the woman, her featureless face, the way she didn't leave footprints, didn't make a sound. Somewhere outside the tent I was certain she hadn't gone far. We woke to a silence that didn't feel like peace. The forest around our tent was still, too still. Not even birdsong, no rustling branches, just that oppressive quiet like the woods were holding their breath. Jack was already sitting up, unmoving. His face was pale, his eyes locked on the ground just outside the tent flap. "There are footprints," he said. I leaned over and peered out. Bare, human prints circled the tent, small, wet outlines pressed into the moss. Not ours. Too narrow, too light, too many. They crisscrossed in a messy tangle, some stopping just inches from the nylon. We didn't speak as we packed up camp. The tension between us was heavy, but it wasn't from each other. It was from out there, from the woods, from the lake, from whatever had followed us into the dark. We set off early, hoping to reach the trailhead before noon. But the path we took yesterday had changed. The ferns seemed taller, closer. Trees that had been familiar landmarks were gone. It was like walking through a version of the forest shaped from memory and dream. The air grew colder even though the sun was out, or at least should have been. The light barely filtered through the dense canopy, and shadows stretched in the wrong direction. Then Jack stopped. "I swear I heard—" Before he could finish, I heard it too. Whispering. From behind the trees, all around us. Dozens of voices layered over each other, unintelligible but urgent. The sound made my skin crawl. It didn't stop. It moved. Always just a few steps behind. My legs felt heavy. Every step forward felt like wading through water. Time was wrong, too. Our watches disagreed. One read 10:23, the other 4:41. The sun hadn't moved. "Emma," Jack said suddenly, "do you see that?" Up ahead, just beyond a fallen log, a pale figure stood between the trees, tall, white. Not the woman from the lake. This one was smaller, quicker. It darted through the underbrush like a wild animal. I caught a glimpse of bare feet, a pale smock, arms too long for its body. It vanished behind a tree without a sound. "Go," I whispered. "Just go." We broke into a run, branches tearing at our arms, the whispering rising behind us like wind through bone. The trail twisted strangely, familiar then foreign, narrowing to a footpath barely visible. Our map was useless. Our compass spun like it was panicked. Then we saw it, the ranger station. We ran to it, desperate, hearts pounding. The door was locked, windows dusty, dark inside, no signs of life, no ranger vehicles, no footprints in the gravel, no birds, no bugs, just stillness. Jack banged on the door. I circled the building. Nothing. We didn't speak. We just turned back toward the road, hoping to find our car. The forest behind us whispered louder now, like it was angry we had left, like it wanted us back. We reached the lot just before the sky turned a deep slate gray, though it wasn't even evening yet. The air tasted like metal. As we drove down the winding road out of the park, the fog followed us, thick, clinging to the rearview mirror like smoke. Halfway down the mountain, I glanced back. She was in the back seat. A woman's face, pale, hollow, eyes wide and fixed on me just for a second, then gone. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Jack hadn't seen her. He was gripping the wheel, silent. We didn't stop until we were miles from the forest, the lake, the ghosts. Back in the city, everything felt normal. People laughed, the sun shone, phones buzzed, but something was off. The shadows in corners lasted too long. The quiet just before sleep wasn't so quiet anymore. Jack started avoiding mirrors. I can't keep houseplants alive. They wither overnight. Sometimes in the early hours I still hear it. That whisper, faint, waiting. We left Lake Crescent behind, but something there didn't leave us.